All right, I want to welcome Dr. Temple Grandin as our keynote speaker. And just a little bit of background about Dr. Grandin. She was born in Boston, Massachusetts, but she's had many achievements that are basically stuff you probably experience every day and you probably didn't know. She's done extensive work in the design and handling of facilities, as well as in the area of animal welfare. And at the same time, she's overcome most of those obstacles as a child that was diagnosed with autism, and she's achieved and written many books and manuscripts. She currently works at Colorado State University. She got her PhD at the University of Illinois and her master's at Arizona State University, and started out with her bachelor's at Franklin Pierce College. And we welcome you to join Pixels of Production as our keynote speaker today, Dr. Grandin. Thank you.
Well, it's really great to be here virtually. Wish I could be there in person. And presently I'm a college professor at Colorado State University in the Animal Science Department. When I was 4 years old, I had no speech. That's, I was lucky to get good early intervention. Now, the first thing you might ask is how to end up in the cattle industry. I'm an Easterner originally. Well, the opportunity came up to visit a ranch in Arizona. And I was afraid to go. And mother said, you have a choice. You can go for a week or you can stay all summer. I went. So I got involved in the cattle industry because I got exposed to it. That's a really important thing in careers. I tell every student now, do internships. Now COVID's messed up a lot of the internships, but try on different things. Find out what you like, find out what you don't like, get lots of job experience. Now, when I first started out in the 70s, I was going around all the Arizona feed yards, and being a woman in a feed yard industry in the 70s was a much bigger obstacle than autism. The only women in the Arizona feedlots in the early 70s were in the offices. And so I was a real abnormality, going around helping them work cattle in all these different feedlots. Now there's lots of women in the industry. And one of the things I had to do is I had to be better than the guys. And where I got most of the problems, and there's a scene in the HBO movie where they put bull testicles on my vehicle, and that actually happened. It was the foremans. It was not the cow hands working in the field. It was not the owners. The big bosses, for the most part, were good to me. It was that mid-level management that felt really threatened. They did the bull testicle thing and some other really bad things to me. That's where the trouble was. Now, one thing I was good at was recognizing opportunity. And there's a scene in the HBO movie where I get the editor's card because I realized if I wrote for our state farm magazine, that would help my career. And then after I got that card, I produced a good article. And then the next step was writing a column, first for free and then getting paid a little bit. One of the big problems I'm seeing right now with kids that are labeled autism or some other learning thing or some other handicap is they're not learning work skills. They're doing really good on academics and no work skills. Because I got granddads coming up to me all the time and grandmothers coming up to me, and they find out that they're on the autism spectrum when the kids get diagnosed. But that grandparent had a paper route. We've got to do a lot more on teaching life skills, teaching working skills. And then once I started writing, people thought I was weird, but I got a reputation for a good writer. And when I covered the Arizona Cattle Feeders meeting, it was covered accurately, and I'd make an accurate summary of each speaker. Then the opportunity came up to design the DipVat project. This brings up another thing, confidence. When I accepted the job to do that, I was only at the 60% level of competency. I knew all the cattle handling stuff, but I didn't know anything about concrete reinforcement. And so I said, give me 3 weeks. Boy, I had to get on that phone and call up people to get the drawings on how to do the rebar. And there's been some studies that show that a woman won't take a job lots of times until she's at the 90% level. I took this job at the 60% level. And a lot of guys will take a job at the 60% level. And then I worked really hard to get my skills up there. Now, I've since been on jobs where you had guys at the 20% level. They tried to wing it. And they had a multi-million-dollar plant closer because they built a plant without enough wastewater treatment. And he wouldn't listen to anybody. Came out of sales, big yacker. Now, one of the things that really motivated me in my 20s is I wanted to prove I wasn't stupid. That was a gigantic motivator for those big projects. Another thing I learned was to sell my work instead of myself. So an interview for me was lay the drawings out on the table, put the pictures out on the table. I can actually show you some of my drawings right here. Put that stuff out on the table and just show it off. And I learned to just sell my work. There are some of my drawings in my book right there. I hope I got those nice and clear. And when people looked at my drawings, they went, wow, that was selling the portfolio. And there were some good people that helped me. I had teachers that helped me through school. I had Mr. Carlock, my science teacher, who got me interested in science by giving me lots and lots of interesting projects. So now studying changed from something mother wanted me to do to a pathway to a goal of becoming a scientist. And there were good people out in the industry that helped me. After I'd worked for the magazine for about 3 years, the magazine was sold and we got a new boss and he thought I was totally weird. I didn't pick up the warning social signs, but Susie, who worked in the graphic design, did. And she said, we got to get together a portfolio of all your work. So I made this giant scrapbook and it was this thick of all my articles. And when I showed the new boss that portfolio, I got a raise. But I thank Susie for recognizing those warning signs. Another really good mentor was Jim Uhl, a contractor. He had seen some of my drawings and he was just starting a little construction company, which is now a huge construction company. And he seeked me out to sell jobs and design things. So there were people that recognized, my abilities. And what I learned was to sell my work rather than myself. And what you got to do with some of these people that are different, I criticized some welding on one job. I said, look like pigeon doo-doo. And the plant engineer pulled me into his office and just explained in private, that's not okay. You have to apologize for that. But he told me what I should do. Not just yell and scream, but what I should do. And I remember him saying to me, and I was in his office down in the boiler room, and he goes, Whitey, that's the name of the welders up in the cafeteria, and you're going up there right now and apologizing. Now, I didn't tell him the welding was wonderful, because it wasn't. But I apologized for the rude language. And then the plant engineer, Harley, explained to me that if there was a problem with the welding, I should have come to him, because Whitey was his employee. So he calmly explained the chain of command, too. You see, Harley had no training as a job coach. Harley was a perfect job coach. He was just an older guy, he was probably in his 50s, been in the industry a long time. Well, I think now we'll just open it up to questions to you guys, because that's what I really like is the questions.
I'll ask the first question, Dr. Grandin. At what age do you think youth could safely get involved in working with livestock?
Well, in 4-H, they can get involved with sheep really young. I'd recommend a goat or a sheep for first animal, not a billy goat. We don't want them budding. I can remember as a child getting buddied by a billy goat. But let's start off with a lamb, the easier animal. I wouldn't give a real young kid a steer for a first project. We've got to get kids out doing things. I'm seeing so many kids that have got a label and they're not doing enough stuff. The other bad thing is the schools have taken out so many of the hands-on classes. They're not experiencing enough stuff. If I hadn't had art, sewing, and woodworking in elementary school, I would have hated school.
No, I'd agree with you, Dr. Grandin. I think that's sometimes where students learn what they like, if they get to try some of those hands-on. I guess my question would be, what's some of the best ways to teach some of those life skills that you're talking about early on that we probably, is it through 4-H, through taking care of animals, or is there some other ways that we can?
Well, I was about 6 or so or 7. I got an allowance every week and I could buy 5 comics with that, 10 candy bars. But if I wanted this airplane right here, which now costs $5, but back in the early 50s, it was 69 cents. I had to save for 2 weeks. Every kid in our neighborhood was taught that. One thing that helped me is an old-fashioned 50s upbringing. When I was like 5 years old, Mother would take me to the grocery store and I'd help get things off the shelves. And I had my behavior problems, but it was kind of fun to go to the grocery store. I knew it was a privilege. I don't think I ever threw a fit in that grocery store. Okay. And we were going out to restaurants and sometimes nice ones really early. You know, and I pitched some fits, but not in a nice restaurant because I liked going there. And you know, getting exposed to these sorts of things early. And then in the 50s, we were out playing all the time. And then it was sit down meals where table manners were taught. Like if I stuck my finger in my drink, mother would say, use the spoon. She wouldn't scream at me. She just would say, use the spoon, just giving the instruction on what I should do. And when I was out working on these great big plant projects, because I designed the front end for every Cargill plant in North America, I'll tell you how I sold that job. I sent a portfolio to Mr. Fielding back in the late 80s. They had a big fold out drawing, very similar to the one I just showed, pictures, a brochure of my brochure and a couple of trade magazine articles. 30-second wow. That's how I sold that. And when I got working on these projects and spending time on these construction sites, I'm going to estimate that 20% of the very skilled welders that could build anything from a drawing, drafting people that were laying out whole entire plants, laying out all the equipment, designing equipment, and machinery designers were either autistic, dyslexic, or ADHD. And I am saying that seriously. I'm not saying that as a joke. When I go back and I can kind of play videos in my head of some of these big projects where I spent a lot of time on the site. And where are those kids today? They're playing video games in the basement. Half of Silicon Valley's got some autism. They avoid the labels.
I have a question for you, if you don't mind. We have a lot of beginning women farmers that have joined us this evening. What are 3 key things about livestock production that would be really good for them to know?
Well, first of all, in livestock production, they might want to get Temple Grandin's Guide to Working with Farm Animals. And it's aimed at small farms. It has a basic cattle handling information in it. That would be helpful to them. Now, things with pasture rotation and cropping, that's very, very local. All cattle handling is much more general, but things on what kind of pasture they should do or cover crops, they need to get really good local advice is what I advise on that. You know, and find some mentors in the ag industry that are willing to help you. And I had people that helped me. There was Jim the contractor. Yeah, and then there were some things where I had to clean it up. There's that scene in the movie where the boss slammed down the deodorant. That happened. You know, come on hygiene. It's clean it up. It's okay to be eccentric. I was just on a conference just yesterday where people were giving little presentations about projects, and one lady had purple hair. That's fine. And she had really nice slides and a really good presentation. Okay, so a little bit eccentric's just fine. You know, a rude, filthy slob? No, that's not fine.
I have read your book, Dr. Grandin. I'm working with farm animals, and actually it's very good. And I'm glad you recommended it, because I do think a lot of beginning farmer ranchers would benefit from reading it. It kind of ties into my question for you relative to your work with animal welfare. A lot of women today, particularly, are concerned about animal welfare and how they raise their animals on their farm. What would you say is probably one of the greatest things that they can do on their farm to make sure that they do have proper animal welfare on their farm?
All right, let's just start with cattle. Good cattle handling, low stress cattle handling. That's going to be the first thing. And the thing on the cattle handling, I've been in this industry now since the early 70s. It's improved a whole lot. It's improved a whole lot. There was a recent survey just done at Texas feed yards, and I'm looking at how stock people interacting with animals. And compared to the 70s, it's a huge improvement. But you still had 40% of the people yelling at cattle. Just stuff in the crowd pen too full. You know, these are things that we always have to just keep reminding people to not do things like put too many cattle in the crowd pen. These are like basics. And now, at least back in the 70s, it was 95% of the people would overload the crowd pen. You know, now it's 60% are not doing it. So that's an improvement. But we still have to remind people not to do that. You know, and to learn good handling takes some skill. Now on crop stuff, they're doing that. Again, They've got to get really good local advice, because that's, in engineering, it's called site specific. I would start out small, walk before you run sort of thing. People just beginning, just a few beef cattle, maybe just do AI in the beginning, so they don't have to deal with the bull. Let's just work into it slowly. And my book does cover bull safety. And one thing I like to tell all beginning people with cattle, if you have an orphan bull calf and you bottle raise it and it never is around other cattle, then when it gets to be sexually mature at age 18 months to 2, then it turns and attacks somebody, because it's a view, especially a man, is because it's viewing that other man as a rival for mates. It hasn't learned that it's cattle. And so I'd recommend that if you have an orphan bull calf and you can't get it on a cow or get it out with other cattle, just make a steer out of it. I'd like to just get rid of that problem. And a lot of people don't understand what a broadside threat is, where he turns sideways, hunches up his neck to show you how big and bad he is. That's some very basic things. And that's all in that book on the cattle handling. But there's a lot of other things they've got to do too, like cash flow and business stuff. And there's a lot of, I always recommend to people to go to the local extension office for advice, because a lot of people don't seek advice when they need to. I was just on a conference about students in college that might have a learning difference. Maybe they're autistic or dyslexic or something. And when I was in college and I failed my first math quiz, I got tutoring. I did something about it. Big mistake a lot of students make is they don't ask for help until they're flunking the course. They should have asked for help on the first failed quiz, not asking for help soon enough.
Yeah, usually they ask when it's too late, like their finals week is next week, and then they ask for help.
I went for help first failed quiz. I went for help at 3 different universities. And I had a lot of tutoring, and I asked for help early.
Yeah, and it's the same thing farming. Almost before you buy the first cow, you should probably make sure what kind of fencing and.
Well, that's right. And you need to go around. The other thing that what I did when I first started is I went to every feed yard in Arizona and I worked cattle. So I was looking at how the facilities worked in many different places. And I started to figure out certain layout mistakes that were really bad, that did not work. But get out and visit places. Travel's a great educator. Now that's greatly restricted now with COVID, but you learn so much. And look at a whole lot of different things. The other thing is when I first started, one of the mistakes I made, and a lot of people with sort of the engineering side of things make, is they think they can just fix everything with technology. That does not replace management. Yes, there are situations where you can get a new technology and it can really make a big difference. But right now we have a big push to improve animal welfare. And I was just looking at some statistics that came from one of the large companies where they were doing projects to improve welfare. And I was going, well, how many of these projects were strictly a management thing they did, like improve handling, for example? How many of them were small improvement? Like you put rubber mats on your unloading dock, simple things like that. Or how many did you just take a facility and just build it over again? Well, 2/3 of the things that they did to improve welfare were either management only, like training, or they were incremental improvements, like they redid a couple of chutes or gates. They were simple things. And it wasn't buying all the new stuff. Yeah, there was about 1/3 of it that was new stuff, but 2/3 of it was management and incremental improvements, small changes, a whole series of small changes. I've done this in animal handling. So I'd start out, let's put less cattle in the crowd pen. Then we got rid of the sunbeam that came in through the hole in the roof. Then I put a barricade up so they couldn't see a person that was checking cattle IDs. And then I put a light on a chute entrance. And each one of these little changes made a big improvement. But it took a lot of time to observe these things. It's not done just overnight. Somebody has to go out there and say, okay, now the cow stopped the sunbeam. Let's cover up the hole in the roof. Or these pigs are balking at this corner, let's round off the corner and we're going to change one of the gates. And that's a small thing. It's not rebuilding the whole thing, and it can make a big difference. You know, especially in an existing facility where you can't justify building a new yard. And then there's a point where you've got people with no cattle handling facilities. Well, that's not good. You've got to have at least a single file chute and a head gate to put them in.
I think that was really what I just took away from what you just said is that years ago we used to sit and watch and analyze and observe. And nowadays, I think maybe we just rush and do things too quickly on the farm.
Well,
But taking your time to look.
Well, I find that okay, if your corrals are just completely falling down and all broken, there's a point where you're just going to have to replace it. I remember one old plant I went to, the whole yard was falling apart. I said, you know what? You own the property out there in that field. Let's build a new yard. They're going to tear this garbage dump down, and then you have room to expand your slaughter floor. It was a great big pork plant. They wanted to put $1 million into this piece of garbage, and I said no. But there's a lot of other situations where you might have a facility that's not really designed all that well, but you can make some small changes. Add a gate somewhere, round off a corner, block where they see the vehicles passing by. A whole lot of simple little things can add up to a big thing. But when I first started, I made the mistake that a lot of people in engineering make, oh, we're going to just save everybody with engineering. Now it's going to be drones are going to save everybody in crops. Or all this we've got, I was reading about ear tags just this morning that can tell whether a cow's chewing or not. But somebody has to act on that data. And some of the computer faces, the interfaces are awful. It's absolutely terrible. And they need to be simplified. But you have to act on the data from that ear tag. And the older I've gotten more into management. I can fix and looking at stuff. This is stuff going on right now. I kind of enumerated some things here with another client I've been working with. They've been working on fixing a lot of stuff to improve animal welfare. And 2/3 of it is either management and training or very small improvements. They put mats on the unloading ramp. They used a different kind of litter for the chickens. I mean, it was simple things, and only about 1/3 of it was, I'm not going to big expensive. Yeah, we rebuilt a place completely, and they showed it all torn out. And we had, and there were a number of it where you just improved the management. You know, you stopped rough handling. You stopped this chicken's broken waterers, and then it improves their feed. Things that are that simple. That's management stuff. And I find lots of times that when there's a problem, and of course I troubleshoot handling problems, is people are too quick. Oh, let's just rip out everything. Well, I don't know if I can justify the expense of ripping out everything. Now, I find there's a lot of places when it comes to cattle handling, especially in some of these big places, you've got to put in some non-slip floor. And there's the double D family mats. You can do grooving machines, or you could do animats. That's a new kind of mat that's out now. But that's not rebuilding the whole facility. But I still have to talk about the old things, because right now in 2020, I went to a brand new, really nice livestock yard, and they'd only put a broom finish on the floor, on the concrete. That's not going to be sufficient. I still have to talk about the same stuff. 5 years ago, I went to a 4-H barn, hard troweled floor in the shape of the pig barn. Smooth, hard troweled floor. Still have to keep talking about those old basics. And even when people are working on things right now, and it was really cool, everybody got to give their little presentation. A lot of it was basics. We added a catwalk to a cattle handling facility. You know, it was simple things.
So I think what you're currently talking about leads really nice into our next question, Dr. Grandin. It's what's the difference between a successful livestock producer and a non-successful producer?
Well, first of all, you have to not go broke. I mean, I just to put it really simply, you've got to not go broke. And People could go crazy like buying a fancy new tractor instead of getting a good used one. And I've been to a number of workshops where they talk about, trying to reduce some of the equipment and stuff you need to have. And so you can't justify putting in a super fancy cattle handling facility because it's not going to pay for itself. That's the first thing. And the other thing is, a lot of small producers, got to find markets. We had a big problem with COVID, with a plant shutting down all these pigs that had to be killed on the farm. Absolutely horrible. And I have been getting all kinds of inquiries now since COVID started on building some smaller plants, ranging from something that might do 30 cattle a week to something that might do 300 to 500 a day. And right here in Fort Collins, we have a craft beer industry that coexists with a gigantic Budweiser plant. And I can see these small places in various niche markets, but it makes a more flexible supply chain so that when something goes wrong, I hope we never, ever have to repeat this mess of killing all those pigs. That was the most horrible thing. Thank goodness we didn't have to kill cattle. But we need a more distributed supply chain, because the problem with big is when it breaks, it's very fragile. It's fragile. It can do a really great job on welfare. You can do a great job on welfare. You can do a great job on food safety, but when it breaks, COVID broke it. Storms can break it. A fire that burned up a plant roof, that caused a disruption in the cattle market. And you have a more distributed supply chain. It's more robust, but it's going to be more expensive. That's your trade-off. I can't change that. The big centralized supply chain, very efficient, but when it breaks, you're in trouble. And so we need to be supporting local things. And I'd recommend somebody getting into farming in Missouri, work on, finding a niche for their product. And one of the biggest problems right now is we don't have enough small processing plants. And I just was talking to a guy yesterday, and he was telling me about somebody built a new processing plant and they didn't have enough wastewater treatment. I've seen that mess happen with a big plant. No, you better get some advice on how to do some of this stuff right. If the slaughter floor equipment's a bit wrong, I can change that. But if you mess up on wastewater treatment, you're really in a pile of trouble. Or you don't have enough electrical power or water. They've got to, and start out slow. Let's just start off with a few cattle. And I remember when Coleman Natural Beef started in the early 90s. Everybody thought he was kind of crazy. The cattle industry criticized him. He started out really small. He had one beautiful thing, a beautiful semi-trailer with a gorgeous sign on it that he'd park in places back east. Started out small. He'd show off that trailer. It was the only really nice thing he had in the beginning. And then 5 or 6 years later, every rancher's lining up trying to get in the program, a program that they criticized first. Now there's a lot of these kind of programs. And right now there's like 3 medium-sized plants under construction, and people are getting into some of the mobile slaughter plants. I think most of these mobile slaughter plants are going to get parked. But the advantage of starting with one of those trailers is you can get into doing a small processing plant without spending millions of dollars. Yeah, I'd build a slab, park it, but it enables you to get started, and maybe in the future you can replace it with a real facility. But otherwise you're spending jillions of dollars. Also, it can help you on permitting because it is a trailer, so it's not a fixed thing to the land. It sits on the slab. It's not attached to it. I know the rules on that because in my book here, let's say somebody's starting out leasing land. Well, if I attach the cattle handling facilities to the land with a post set in concrete, now my landlord owns those cattle handling facilities. So I got lots of layouts in there, little simple layouts that will work with portable panels. And then I still have my big book, Humane Livestock Handling, for the larger operations.
Very good. One of the other questions is, and we have a lot of young women on, but we also have, I think one of the things right now with women in agriculture, there's a lot of women today that are looking at it as almost a second career. They were doing nursing, or they were a business person, and now they've decided that they do enjoy being outside in nature and have decided they want to reach out into the agriculture sector. What would be some advice for those people that maybe that you got early in your career that's allowed you to be successful, or that could help those sort of people that are switching careers and looking into agriculture later in life?
Well, I would start small and get lots of advice from locals, good locals that you can trust, especially on pasture management, because that's so local. And start going to meetings. You see, one thing that working for the magazine did for me is I went to all of these meetings, and I got to go to big expensive ones for free too. Mm-hmm. And I learned so much of those, and you network. And the thing I really miss with all this Zoom conferencing stuff is I don't get to go over to school and just sort of like talk to my colleagues over there. It just doesn't work the same way on Zoom, because I met somebody at a meeting or at a reception party and meeting that got me into the Swift plant, and that was shown in the movie. They changed the venue a little bit. It actually was at a cattle reception as part of a meeting, and the lady was the wife of the insurance agent. But she liked my shirt. I did have on a hand embroidered shirt. That part of it's true. The movie just changed it to the grocery store, but it was a chance meeting, and she opened the door to that.
So what's your advice? I'm concerned, Dr. Grandin, that COVID's put us in a sort of permanent cycle of not having a lot of face-to-face interaction. I worry about.
You're still going to get out there, at least on a farm. You can be outside, you can stay apart, and they can come over, and we're going to stay 8 feet apart, and we're going to wear masks, and you're going to come over, and we can talk, and we can do Zoom calls. We can but they need to get out to some farms. You can't do that over Zoom. What we're doing right here at CSU, we've managed to keep our labs open. One of my graduate students just had cattle reproduction lab. There's no way you're going to do that over Zoom. And the veterinary students have to do all their surgery stuff and all of that. And the big lectures they've been putting online. And then they do some hybrid, which is, I don't know if that's a good thing. The most important thing is labs in person. That's the most important thing. And I saw one repro lab that we had, and face shields and masks, because they were shoulder to shoulder practicing. They had cattle innards with the reproductive tracts, and they were practicing doing AI on them. That's got to be done in person.
Yeah, I know there's a little bit of concern, and just from in the area of swine industry, even a lot of those firms don't want you to bring students or outside people.
Well, they didn't want students in there even before COVID.
Correct.
Because they were worried about African swine fever, about swine fever, getting in there. I can tell you right now, as far as the swine fever, they better control what goes on at the airport.
Yes. I
have come in, I came in from a trip from Asia. One of my trips, I came in, and they had some guy's suitcase in the ag with all kinds of weird food stuff in there. And I since I'd been on a farm, I declared ag, I always do, but they just waved me right through. But I just look at that stuff and I'm going, oh, you've got to be kidding. Because that's how it's going to get in. And that's how COVID got into the country, was the airplane. Boy, if we cut that off, we wouldn't even have had it. An airplane brought it here from both coasts. That's how it got in.
All right, so our
that's been a problem with swine farms forever. That's not a COVID thing. But there's a point where sometimes biosecurity is just used to cover up a lot of bad practices. Because unfortunately, just before COVID hit, I was talking to some students that had interned at swine farms, and some of them, a lot of just terrible management, broken equipment, terrible management. One I couldn't remember one, the floor was broken. And so Piglet, this was a scraper pit building. Piglet got down under there and grew into a market hog underneath the floor. I'm going, you gotta be kidding. This is just terrible management. And these things have got to have oversight. Got to have oversight. And it's a constant. It's just like like traffic out on the highway. Okay, going back to this company where they were doing their little presentations. Oh, there was one place where they had a handling issue and they just weren't doing the oversight. It was management. You've got to constantly stay on top of it. You know, you put 8 cattle in that crowd pen, not 15. And you've got to constantly monitor that.
Constantly monitor, I would say constantly remind too. When I go out on the farm, there's a producer, I've reminded him several times to just not put so many head in his tub, and every time he has it smashed full, and it's just always a nightmare working his cattle at his farm.
Well, it's total nightmare. Because the other thing you want to do is use your following behavior. Wait till the single file's half empty, bring those cattle up there, and they'll just pass through the crowd pen, and then you're using your following behavior. But the problem is good handling is going to take more walking to go back and forth to that crowd pen. And the other thing I found on some of this cattle handling stuff, the owner of the farm has got to decide that they're going to make a priority of some of this stuff. You know, in looking at this new survey that came out of Texas, and it was in Translational Animal Science, well, the good news is that there were 39 feed yards, if I remember right, in this survey, and something 80 some stock people they monitored, is over half of them were not doing the bad things. That's the good news. And that's an improvement. But we still had 30% or so that were stuffing the crowd pen full and making a whole lot of noise. And the other big mistake is when you got them in a single file chute, they're standing at the head of the animal and poking it on the butt. Because people will say to me, why does Temple Grandin just keep talking about the same stuff? I'm sick of hearing from Temple Grandin. And then that person that said that 5 years ago has been out in the field going around to many different places and now says, now I know why I keep talking about it. And this Texas survey, even though it showed an improvement, you still had a third of them making these same old cattle handling mistakes. You still do have to talk about it.
All right, our next question is, are there any specific or unique techniques women should be aware of when working with livestock?
Well, it'd be the same as anybody, you know, working with livestock. I'm not going to teach it different for women or guys. You know, it's understanding, you know, if you work them in a single file chute, you walk back by them in the opposite direction and they go forward. Makes me really happy when a student takes my class and she worked in a feed yard and went back to her feed yard and tried it. And she came back the following week and said, yeah, it works. Okay, that made me really happy. It'd be the same thing with the guy too.
Yeah, but a lot of the stuff we worry about, we try to prevent injury from female workers in livestock. And there's some things, whether it's pulling the chute down to catch the cattle, sometimes.
Well, some of those things that it's too much effort.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of difference in the design of those leverage systems. And some of them are poorly designed. And some of them take more effort to operate. There's some that are really horrible. I'm not strong enough to operate them. And there's one really chute that I really like that's off the market now, because you didn't have to be Godzilla Gorilla to operate it. Mm-hmm. And of course, a small farm can't afford a hydraulic squeeze chute, but that has the advantage of not being difficult to operate. And the thing with that, you have to make sure the pressure control doesn't get set too tight, because you can really hurt the cattle with it. You know, on the NCBA, you know, measurement system, localization is one of the measurements. And you got more than 5% of those cattle mooing going in because you poked them with a hot shot, or mooing because you squeezed them too hard. You need to fix that. They should not moo in direct response to being restrained. Absolutely should not. And then the BQA also measures prod use, falling down, and miscuts. And they see you measure those things, then you can make it better, or you can work on making it better. And this survey that was on the stockmanship, they measured how the people behaved. It had a high to moderate correlation with BQA, which measures the outcome of handling. It measures the outcome of handling. The stockmanship survey that was in Translational Animal Science measures what the stock person did, like standing in front of it, or unnecessary noise, too many cattle in the crowd.
Very good. So I am curious, since I'm only 5 foot tall, so I work with a lot of livestock, particularly more pigs and cattle, just because they're more my height. But have you ever been injured working with livestock? And
Yes, I have. And I've been very close to getting killed with livestock. Okay, injury. When I first started, I only been in it 2 years. I went to Texas feed yard. I put too many cattle in the crowd pen, and they shoved the gate back in my face, and it broke my nose. And I went back to the hotel and I straightened it. And that's why I've got a deviated septum. That was like real stupid. That was in the early 70s. Now, the cattle that almost killed me, this is something where dogs had been biting cattle in the lead up chute where they can't get away. And these was fed cattle. One was in Texas and one was in Arizona. One in Texas, there was a fed heifer in a crowd tub. I touched her with a paddle and both back feet came flying out of there. Another one was a heifer, feedlot heifer in the lead up at one of the big plants here in Colorado. I touched her back. Well, I just touched her back, both back feet, whammo. And she managed to knock a guy's hard hat off. No, bitten by dogs is not okay. Another really, really dangerous thing, and I don't think it's going to be that big a problem in Missouri, is cattle that see the first person on foot at an auction, a feed yard, or a packing plant. Because the flight zone with the horse, okay, they're used to the horse. And so the flight zone might be 10 feet with the horse and 60 feet with the person on the ground. Because the person on the ground's novel. So one thing I'm going to say is it's fine to work cattle with horses, but they need to learn to go in and out of a pen with people on foot so they don't run over the next person in the supply chain. Because there was a lady in her 50s killed by fed cattle at one of the plants. And I think they were these cattle that had been just handled on a horse. She put them in the pen and they rebounded back out, ran over the top, for stepped on her head. She died a few months later. Horrible accident. And they're really dangerous. And they'll get in an alley and they'll race back and forth like this. And that's a problem I have to fix at the farm. Okay, so what the packing plant do? Okay, it's hockey helmets and rodeo vests now. Okay, so we put armor on the people. You know, my approach is going to be, we're going to go back to that feedlot and find out what's going on with these cattle. And then the cattle that nearly kicked my head off in Texas, I went and looked them up in the buyer's office, and those cattle had a history. Got loose and ran down the highway. No, we need to do something about that feed yard's cattle handling. Now, I've seen dogs very beautiful out in the pasture, beautiful working the flight zone, but I hate a dog single file chute or biting cattle in the squeeze chute or biting them while they're standing in line to lead up, because all it does is teach them how to kick. And it's like my head came that close to getting taken off by one of those heifers. And it was a feedlot animal. It was not a range cow.
Yeah, and something with cattle, it doesn't matter. They can have just a little, give them an inch and they'll find a way to kick you in the nose if they can. So,
well, but the thing is when they learn to use both barrels, there's usually been a history of some, not very good handling.
Correct.
And the thing is, animals don't forget. They remember bad things, and they remember them really well. And they'll also remember certain people doing some bad things. Now, a common dangerous thing you can get with a 4-H steer is fine at home when he goes nuts at the show. That's because you got a lot of new things there, like flags, bikes, and balloons. Let's get him used to that stuff when he's at home. Let your animal approach flags, maybe decorate the pasture, let them go up the flags where they voluntarily approach. Don't shove them in their face. And I discuss a lot of this kind of stuff in my book on Animals in Translation. Let that steer voluntarily approach flags. Don't shove them in his face, because if you let him approach them, you might think flags are kind of interesting, and he'll go up to them. But handling's gotten a whole lot better. But the thing is, a problem now is just as the handling's improved, we got more stuff wrong with cattle coming into the plant. Congestive heart failure, enlarged hearts, sore feet, stiff and lame. 20 years ago, somebody said to me, we'd have stiff and lame feedlot cattle. I would have thought you were crazy. And there's various reasons for this. And one of them is pushing the animal's biology just too hard. Like, okay, if we just select for meat, then you tend to select for bad leg conformation. I saw that happen in pigs 40 years ago. I saw that mistake made in pigs. They selected for rapid gain, leanness, small back fat, and they ended up with 50% market hogs lame just from leg conformation issues. You know, now you've got where they're feeding 95% grain and what little hay they get to grind it up into pig feed. You got too many growth promoters. That's another thing that might add to it. And he's heavier at a younger age. And there's a point where the system's starting to fall apart. So I see a welfare issue now at a well-run large meat plant. It's something I have to fix at the farm. The other thing is cull dairy cows that are still in, some of those are in awful condition. That's not the fault of the plant. And then in fed beef, problems with sore feet and well, the mobility. And some of this stuff, we get some bad becoming normal. This happened in the dairy industry. Yes, they're used to looking at lame cattle. You don't see them. And I think some of this is happening with some of the feedlot cattle too. They get used to seeing cattle that don't quite have a normal gait, and they don't see it anymore. No, I call it biological overload. We push an animal to the point where it has problems, and this congestive heart failure, enlarged hearts. We didn't have this problem 10 years ago. Cattle, feedlot cattle dead in the yard at a plant. You know, when I was working out in construction in the 80s and early 90s, and in the Swift plant in Arizona in the 70s, in the Swift plant, fed beef and Holstein fed beef. This is how many deads in the yard we had. 0. Yeah, you see, that's something where it's slowly increased. And now I find if I want to get really angry, I go visit the gut table. So when they open them up and I see a big deformed heart or a lot of liver abscesses, I just get furious. And when I've done some consulting, I went and taught other people in the plant how to look at stuff in the gut table, because I used to not pay any attention to the gut table because it didn't have anything in there that I was interested in. Now I go looking for welfare issues there. I mean, we've got to back off on some of this stuff. I'm not suggesting going back to old-fashioned cattle, but we've got to, it's not okay to have an enlarged heart. That used to not happen before. This is one of the advantages of having been around since the early 70s. I know the history here. See, somebody new coming into the industry wouldn't know how abnormal that is. So that's a new problem. Just as we got the handling, started getting really nice. Everybody doing all these low stress workshops, really, really good. Then it started seeing these other problems, and they got cattle that are difficult to handle because they got stuff wrong with them.
I really appreciate you, Temple, agreeing to be a keynote speaker for Pixels Up Production. I think you've talked about a lot of subjects that I think are very relevant to our participants, and I really appreciate it. So thank you very much for taking the time to present to our group today.
Well, it's really, really good to be here, and I hope we gave you some insights, and I want to encourage young women to go into the industry. And while they're still in college, try different things. I know it's harder now with COVID, but try different stuff. Do you like dairy? Do you like beef? Do you like sheep or goats or, you know, whatever? You know, try different stuff, because you don't know what you like and you don't know what you hate until you try it. You know, we have, and for people starting out, get lots of advice from Extension, from other farmers, and start out slow, build it slowly. Because one problem with some of the niche markets that people have had is people liked the product and they were selling it online, and then they didn't have enough supply. So then they started cheating, like grain-fed, grass-fed beef. That's not okay. What you say on your label's got to be right. And I saw one company, I won't use their name, but selling boxes of high-end product, and you ought to see the horrible reviews on that website. And I know what's happening. They didn't have enough supply. They shouldn't have tried to fill those orders. They were just putting anything they could find in that box. No, that can be a problem. You know, then you just, okay, we build it slowly, but you've got to put the quality product in that package that you say you're making.
And
No,
they have to know the whole pig is not all bacon. You still got
exactly.
shoulder and
Exactly. And the other thing I think we have to do on these big plants is, let's say you got another pandemic, made people sick working in the plants, is you can push carcass pork out the back door of that plant.
Mhm.
In fact, I read newspaper articles where Smithfield was selling, carcass pieces of pigs to China, and they didn't have to kill all these pigs because you can just put hams and middles and shoulders out the back door with half the staff. And then there's places where you can open up a trailer full of that stuff and you could sell it in 30 minutes. And then things like milk getting dumped because it's in the wrong package. Well, we need to be getting things in place so something that doesn't happen. The food waste, absolutely horrible. And then a lot of the ways they killed the pigs was highly questionable. No, we've got to work on the flexibility of that supply chain on both ends.
I couldn't agree with you more.
No, it's something that needs to be done, and people are getting interested in building these plants. And unfortunately, I just talked to a guy, said a beautiful new plant got built and it doesn't have enough wastewater treatment. Don't make those kind of mistakes because that's right now.
Yeah.
That happened. That's now. Just learned about it yesterday.
So does anybody else have any other questions for Dr. Grandin?
Dr. Grandin, I have one question, and that would be if we would want to purchase your books that you have talked about this evening, where would we go to find those?
Oh, Amazon. That's the easiest way to get them. Temple Grandin's Guide to Working with Farm Animals, Animals in Translation. I have another book, Animals Make Us Human. Amazon's the best way to get them. In fact, I've got a new book on the slaughter of animals. And so somebody's starting out new meat plant, this would be useful for animal handling and operations. And I would definitely get that from Amazon. It is published in England. The shipping is horribly slow. If Amazon has it in stock, you can get it quickly.
And you have some other good books on
Autism?
and
Let's talk about autism books. My most basic book on autism is The Way I See It.
Yes.
It's a whole lot of little short chapters. We just updated this last year. And you don't have to read the whole book. You can just pick out the chapter that answers some of the issues. And one of the big problems I'm seeing, especially the fully verbal end of the autism spectrum, is some parents are so overprotective their kids not learning shopping, not learning driving. I've got a whole chapter on their driving. It's going to take longer. I did 200 miles on dirt roads before I did traffic. You do lots and lots of practice in totally safe places, like fields are probably too muddy, but parking lots. I talked to 3 families that were using cemeteries to practice driving in. You find these places, like I'd start with a big parking lot, then maybe you graduate to the cemetery, then maybe it's the deserted office park, and you work into it very slowly. Now, as a visual thinker, you see, I see those places.
Yeah.
And let's
There's a lot
start
of
with a
good-
parking lot that's got no light poles to hit.
Yep.
Because if I hadn't learned to drive, I wouldn't have been able to have done any of the things I did.
So great. Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll try to post some of those lists of those books to our participants so they can see some of those.
And I have another textbook that's called Improving Animal Welfare Practical Approach. Improving Animal Welfare Practical Approach. That's aimed at, it'd be really good textbook, if a college taught a class in animal welfare, a good book just to have as a reference, because it talks about all the different scoring systems. We've got, PACO's got more and more audits going on now. People are really, starting to take off on animal welfare. When you have a major corporation that has all their people, like have a conference of here's all our projects we did, that's really a good thing.
Yeah.
People are starting to really take these things seriously.
And your leadership in that area has really excelled the livestock industry. I will commend you on that, Dr. Grandin.
Well, and there's other young people coming up. I figure at my age now, well, if they tell you how old I am, I've been in this industry since the early 70s. We've got to really encourage our young people to get out and do things. You know, I've got, well, I've put about 20 graduate students through either a master's degree or PhD, and that's what I did with speaking money. You know, they're out there. I've got 3 that are professors now. I'm really happy about that. Kurt Vogel, Ruth Wooley, and Lily Calloway Edwards. And then I've got some working in industry. So that's, you know, we've got to work on helping the young people to get started. We need more young people in agriculture. And we've got to fight to keep our FFA programs in the schools.
Correct.
Absolutely, we've got to fight to keep that. Because how is a student going to get interested in ag if they don't ever do anything with it?
Correct. And FFA is a great way to introduce them to careers, and that they technically don't have to go to a 4-year college institution either.
No, and the other thing, we've got a gigantic shortage of skilled trades.
Yep.
Gigantic, like the people I worked with, brilliant welders that could build, and they weren't just welders. They could build anything. If you gave them a drawing, they could build it for you. And those people are retiring, they're not getting replaced. Because one of the things that came up on some of these little project reports that some of these people were doing is there were 2 places going, oh man, we had to like find a shop that built this thing. Nobody knows how to weld. And I think it's a real problem.
Yeah.
But you know, and I know a guy who's building great big, huge meat packing plants, and he took the FFA welding class. That's how he started.
Yeah.
But he's older now. You know, we've got a big problem with loss of skills for building a chicken processing plant. All the equipment that goes inside a chicken processing plant is coming from Holland now. I was in it last year just before, you know, 6 months before COVID. It's and that because you take the kid, he might be dyslexic or something like that, doesn't get a chance to take welding or auto mechanics or some other thing. And these are jobs that are COVID proof and they are recession proof.
Correct. We found out pretty quickly what essential jobs are. And
well, those jobs are going to be around. Yep. Hospitality and restaurants. I wouldn't want to be in that. Yeah. We're going to try to open our ski resorts with only thing that'll be open other than the lifts is the restrooms. It's bring your own food. There'll be no lessons, no ski rentals. You can go use the lifts. We'll give you a place to go to the bathroom, and you can't go in any other building. They're going to try to reopen them that way.
That'll be interesting.
Oh, that's what I just read the other day. And same thing with golf clubs. The clubhouse is closed. They'll have a restroom, but that's it. And you just go in and play golf and then leave.
Well, thanks again, Dr. Grandin. We appreciate you speaking to us and giving us your insight. It's been great to have you. So,
well, it's really, really great to be here. Wonderful to be here. And I hope I've given people some insights. And we need to be encouraged. The other thing we got to be doing with some of these girls and young students, the boys too, is they're not getting introduced to tools.
Yep.
I was using tools when I was in 2nd and 3rd grade. And you've got kids, especially if they got a label, playing with Legos and they're 16 years old and nobody thought to introduce tools.
Yep.
No,
I have 3 boys at my house. They use a lot of tools, unfortunately.
You know, and if it's school, in the elementary school, you can do things like growings, you know, you can grow some little crops in boxes just so they can see it. These, you know, stuff that's just not expensive.
Yep. I gave them nails and hammers and let them pound into wood all the time.
Yeah. But there's a lot of kids that aren't, you know, doing those things.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing too many kids where they sort of become their label, because back in the 80s, I worked with a great big steel shop. The whole family was dyslexic. And they were building huge feed mills for feedlots. And they were all dyslexic. And I've said to when I do a teachers conference, I said, why don't you look up feed mill on Google Images? It's a big, complicated thing. The special ed department's building them. I'm trying to get people to get out of the silos, get across the silos.
Yeah.
Okay, well, it's been great to talk to you.
Yep. Thank you very much. And you have a good rest of your
I will.
evening.